My name is Nicki. I'm an English makeup artist and I live with Carlo and our daughter Sky in Positano, Italy. Our house is far from the road but surrounded by fruit trees and olive groves, and we grow our own food. We'll show you what it's really like to live on the Amalfi Coast. Subscribe and welcome to the Positano Diaries. How I came to live in Positano at the age of 24. I had a whole plan that I was going to take a lovely walk along the beach and then across to the next beach, and I was going to tell you my story as we walked. But as you can tell, it's very, very windy and the sea is pretty rough and noisy as well, and I don't think my microphone can cope with that amount of wind and waves. So I'm going to have to go home and tell you the story from there. It has not stopped raining for days and days, so now is the perfect time for me to tell you how I came to live in Positano when I was only 24 years old. But first of all, you have to know how I discovered Positano. Rewind back to when I was 12 years old. My best friend Celine and her family had been coming to Positano on holiday for years and years. Her grandparents started coming in the 50s and her parents carried on the tradition, and the whole family would go together. When I was 12, they invited me to join them on their family holiday. We stayed at Le Serenuse Hotel and had a week of freedom, running around on the beach, and we had the time of our lives. I remember crying as the car picked us up to take us back to the airport and to dreary old England. The next year I was invited to go back again with them. I begged and pleaded my parents to let me go, and I was given all sorts of odd jobs around the house and garden to earn enough money to be able to go. I was 13 years old and I was big enough to take a camera with me. So this is the first year that I actually took quite a few photos while I was in Positano that summer. We also started to learn our first few words in Italian with the help of a very small Italian phrase book, which is it here? No, it's tucked away in a box of memories at my dad's house in England. Celine and I made friends with a few of the local kids. Well, we basically stalked them, chasing them down alleyways and following them around to this bar with a Pac-Man game in the corner. We seemed to spend a lot of time playing around on an old orange fishing boat, and to this day we are still friends with two of those boys, although strangely enough both Celine and I moved to Italy and the boys both moved away to France and Florida. A couple of years passed by, and then when I was 15 I joined Celine's family holiday in Positano again. This time I experienced my first summer romance and my first cocktail. Celine's dad drove with us from London to Positano in a big white Bentley. We stopped off in Paris and then we drove to Lech in Austria, and then we stopped off in Florence, and eventually we arrived for 10 fantastic days in Positano. We made more friends this time, reconnecting with some of the kids that we'd met in the years before. And we really started to feel like we knew our way around town and we were settling in. But the reality was, we actually only had discovered the beach area and we didn't really know the rest of the town. And we didn't even discover Fornillo Beach until 3 years later when we were 18, and we didn't know anything about Montepetruso or Nocelle or anything higher up in town. In fact, the first time I went to Montepetruso, I was nearly 19 years old. School finished, we were 18, and suddenly we were allowed to make our own choices. All of our friends were interrailing. This was a cheap way of seeing Europe. Around £120 bought you a train pass that lasted for a whole month and could be used anywhere in Europe, no holds barred. Celine and I got our tickets, packed our rucksacks and headed straight to Positano, of course. We stopped off in Paris, we had to change trains and change stations, and unfortunately we lost our connection in Paris and had to scramble to find somewhere to sleep overnight. and then the very next morning we could have stayed in Paris and explored and seen the Eiffel Tower, but no, we jumped on the next train to Naples. We stayed in Positano for 3 weeks, the longest we'd ever spent in town. And we had to camp out at friends' houses on spare beds because we didn't have enough money to stay in hotels, and there was no such thing as Airbnb or even a hostel back in those days. Predictably, we both got swept off our feet by 2 local lads and spent the next couple of years battling to hold up long-distance relationships. Of course, they didn't really work at that time, and after a couple of years, they both petered out. So back to London for me, while Celine headed off to Brazil. I had been working in TV production for a few years beforehand anyway. All my family was in TV, and I started quite early as a production runner and tried a few different jobs over the years, eventually settling on becoming a makeup artist. I took about 1.5 years to train, and then I was let loose on the world with my brushes. I worked on all sorts of amazing productions, including the MTV Music Awards, a showing of Oklahoma, the musical with Hugh Jackman, and I thought that I was pretty happy and settled in London. But then I got a call for a job that completely changed everything. Sony was hosting a big concert in a church in Rome. Andrea Bocelli was singing, and the call was put out for a makeup artist who could speak some Italian and who could lead him on and off stage. I got the job. We went to Rome for a week, and it was the beginning of March. It was very, very cold, but it was a great week's work. And after that, I didn't have anything booked, so I decided that I would pop down to Positano to spend some time with my friends and just have a week off and enjoy the sea. There always seemed to be something to do in Positano. Even if it was the winter, there would be bonfires on the beach, dinner out with friends, trips to the cinema in Sorrento, and I always had such a good time. Every time I went back to England, I felt slightly flat, and it took me quite a while to settle back down again. As I was waiting at Piazza Molini for the taxi to come and pick me up to take me back to the airport, someone pulled up in a car and asked me if I knew of anybody who would be interested in working in an art gallery in Positano for the summer season. Now, without even thinking about it, I said I'd take the job, which therefore changed the course of my life. I went back to England. I told my parents what I decided to do. They tried to talk me out of it. I wouldn't listen to them at all. I packed up a few bags and I came back to Positano. Now let's get one thing straight. I only planned on staying in Positano for that one summer, the summer of 1999. I was going to work the summer in the art gallery, learn Italian, have some fun, and then come back to London, put Italian spoken on my CV, and carry on with my life as a makeup artist in London. What happened was this. The art gallery job didn't work out, and I ended up quitting after about 3 weeks. But I'd been working well in England, and I had enough money to get me through the next few months in Positano, so I decided to stay. It was so cheap to live here back then. I rented a studio flat at the top of the town. It was a tiny, lovely little room. It had the most amazing view, and it only cost me about €300 a month. I spent the whole summer at the beach, bumming around with friends. I would also take Italian children's books with me with my little dictionary, and I would sit there and read the book and translate them, and I learned a lot of Italian that way actually. It was quite helpful. But the main part of my learning Italian came from me just talking to people the whole time. As the summer turned to autumn, I was starting to think about returning home to England when I got offered another job that I couldn't really refuse. 2 little girls who lived in a hotel needed a substitute babysitter while their babysitter went back to England to have a baby for a few months. No, she went back to England for a few months to have a baby. She kept the baby for more than a few months. That baby is now one of Nicola's best friends. But yeah, anyhow, I ended up babysitting these 2 girls. I was given access all areas in this hotel. I was allowed to use the gym, I was allowed to use the swimming pool, and I was allowed to walk into the kitchen and ask for something to eat. So I really couldn't refuse it. And it was quite a fun job. And those two girls are now running that hotel. That kept me in Positano for a few more weeks, and by the time I was no longer needed, the whole world was gearing up for the biggest party of the century, New Year's Eve 2000. Now, if I knew one thing, I knew that I did not want to be back in London celebrating there. I wanted to party in Positano. I knew what was happening that year because it's the same thing that happens every year in Positano, only that this time it was going to be even bigger and even better. Positano at New Year has a huge beach party. After midnight, everybody pours down to the beach after their big dinners. They get an old battered boat with holes in it and they fill it with pieces of wood and they have a huge bonfire on the beach. There's fireworks, there's dancing, there's live music. People walking around in funny hats and funny sunglasses, blowing horns and swigging champagne. It was always so much fun. So I knew that I wanted to be here for that. I decided that I would stay for the Millennium Night and then I would pack my bags and go back to London. And I was sure about it this time. I'd made my plan and I was going to stick to it. The Millennium Night was brilliant. It was the best party that I have ever been to. The power kept going out because there were so many lights on everywhere, and round about midnight everybody just poured down to the beach and everybody was so happy, and there was fireworks and there was dancing. There were champagne bottles on every single surface and there was music, and it was a brilliant night. It was also the first night that I actually spoke to Carlo. And we actually have a photo of that night of us together. Somebody took a photo, I don't know who. There was somebody else in the photo who got cut out, but it's nice to have a memory of that first time that we spoke to each other. And I didn't go back to England. I stayed here. I was quite soon after that offered another job. A friend of mine had a beautiful designer clothes shop that sold Emilia Pucci and Jean-Paul Gaultier and Giambattista Valli, and I spent a few years working there on and off. And eventually I got together with Carlo, and time dragged on and I ended up getting another job as a hostess in the restaurant of one of the fancy hotels here. And I remember that there was one little funny problem that I found about getting a work permit. In Italy back then, it was very easy for me to work because in England was part of Europe and you could live and work anywhere you wanted. But I did have to have a work permit. And to have a work permit, you had to have a job. But to have a job, you had to have a work permit. And it was a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but the only way round this seemed to be knowing somebody of importance who could put in a good word for you and call the work permit offices and get you sorted. And it took quite a while to get that sorted, but eventually we got somebody important to phone up and put in a word for me, and I was given my work permit. And after about 2 years that was abolished, so that wasn't needed anymore. I ended up working in that hotel restaurant until Sky was born, and then I was dismissed and I concentrated on Sky for a few years. And I never really meant to stay. It just sort of all rolled out. There was never one moment when I said, right, that's it, I'm living in Italy. Obviously, once I met Carlo and once I had Sky, I was more settled here. But it had never officially been decided. There was never one moment where I went back to England and packed up all my stuff and brought it here. Just bit by bit, things would end up here, or Dad would pack up a box and send it out. And to this day, I still have a lot of my stuff back at my dad's house in England that I've just never managed to bring here. Even when Sky was little, there was a lot of going back and forth up until when she had a rigid school timetable. We would spend most of the winters back in England and then we'd come back here for the summers, but I'd be flying back and forth pretty much every month or so. There was never that moment when I moved to Italy. Now, due to COVID, this is the first winter that I haven't gone back and forth. I haven't been able to, obviously, and it's very strange because at this point I would normally been in England. I would have gone in November, we probably would have driven back for Christmas this year and spent a good 3 or 4 weeks there. I would have probably been in England now, but it hasn't been possible at all, and I am really looking forward to going at some point. I'd love to see my family again, and we'll just have to hope that at some point soon that will be possible again. So that is how I ended up moving here, staying here. It just sort of happened like a roll-on effect. But my advice is to anybody who's thinking or dreaming of moving somewhere completely different, is to sit down for a minute and think about it like this. Think about, if you don't do it, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, are you going to sit there and think to yourself, oh, I wish I'd taken that opportunity and moved to Italy or moved to France or wherever it is when I was young and free and I could have done it? If you think you might regret not doing it for the rest of your life, then you need to get up and go and do it. Because that's what I did. Dad said to me, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, well, I think so. And he goes, are you going to regret it if you don't? And I said, yes. He said, well, do it then. And I did it. And I haven't really regretted it much. Yes, I could have been working in TV in London with famous people. I would have been a top makeup artist earning tons of money. But in the end, I think my life is happier here. I remember when I split up from that long distance boyfriend, I remember talking to him on the phone, and we were about 21 at the time, but I can remember jokingly saying to each other, oh well, it didn't work out, but let's make a deal. If by the time we're 40, we still haven't found anybody, we'll get together, we'll get a house up near Montepetruso with a garden, and we'll get dogs and chickens and grow our own fruit and vegetables. We said that. Now, of course, that didn't happen with him, thank God, but it happened with Carlo. And in a way, I got exactly what I dreamed. So I was very, very lucky in that sense. But anyhow, that's not what this video is about. This video is about how I moved to Positano when I was 24. I think I've told you that fairly thoroughly. I hope you've enjoyed this little blast from the past history lesson of mine. And yeah, that's what I want to say, is that if you have anything that you think you want to do and you think you might regret if you don't do it, go for it. Do it and enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. And hopefully it will have stopped raining by then and we can go back to doing normal vlogs.